What's up guys, Derek, moreplates.com. Today we're talking about the Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn boxing match debacle. Highly requested video because Conor Benn tested positive for Clomid, which is a fertility drug, which is often used in the context of performance enhancing drug use. Notably, after the cessation of anabolic energetic steroids, SARMs, things that are HPTA suppressive, and could hypothetically be used as a masking agent of sorts. So let's get into it. Basically, BBBC doesn't use VADA, which is notable because VADA is the testing agency that got the positive test result. They use UKAD. So there is two different entities here, and using VADA is as a voluntary way to add a additional level of scrutiny is a noble and commendable thing for sure, because it adds another layer of accountability for being tested at any time presumably, and having just higher level scrutiny. Like, there are certain drugs that are allowed in competition versus allowed out of competition versus when it comes to VADA and their testing protocols, like there are drugs that are just not allowed at all, and there's higher level of scrutiny than with some of the bodies that are actually enforced through the actual sporting organizations themselves. So one of the controversial areas, for example, is stimulant use versus in versus out of competition, and if that should be banned year round, etc. So kind of a side topic, but anyways, he tests positive for Clomid through this voluntary anti-doping association. And obviously the match gets sidelined, postponed, and people are wondering what the fuck happened. So this guy claims he's always been a clean fighter. He's never had a positive test whatsoever. He returned an adverse analytical finding in a sample following an anti-doping test conducted by the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association. So basically, professional athletes can volunteer to be subject to unannounced testing by VADA at any time during the 8 weeks before a scheduled fight. Agreement between the athletes and testers is similar to the arrangements between Olympians and doping authorities, who they keep informed of their daily whereabouts in order to allow testing. I have an app on my phone where I have to designate where I'm going to be every single day. Eubank explained the process at the pre-fight workout on Wednesday. I've been on the app my entire career, will be on it for the rest of my career. They can come and test me blood, urine whenever they see fit. Samples are tested in a VADA laboratory with an internationally recognized anti-doping group collecting these specimens in a chain of custody. VADA has a single list of banned substances and works to educate athletes about what they can and cannot use, as well as providing services such as counseling and referrals, blah, blah, blah. So he tests positive for Clomid, a drug that you should not be using. It's been on the banned substance list forever. What exactly does it do, and why would you be using it? So this is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. A lot of the bodybuilders here are probably very familiar with it, but for those who aren't, it is something that essentially interacts with estrogen receptors in the body in order to prevent the negative feedback to the hypothalamus, which will then regulate, essentially tricking your brain into thinking it's in an estrogen deprived state. So it has two different components in its, pharmacologic structure. It has zooclomiphene and enclomiphene, and these are two separate, drugs that can do their own inherent actions, but ultimately they're slightly different in the way they interact with the estrogen receptor, but ultimately the way it works is through basically tricking your brain into thinking it's in an estrogen deprived state. This is the pharmacodynamics of clomiphene citrate. I think this is a pretty good graphical representation. Primary site of action binds to estrogen receptors in ovaries. Now again, this is often used in the context of fertility. So this is where you would get this graphical representation in females, and we'll extrapolate it out for males next. Binds to estrogen receptors in ovaries. Direct effect on ovaries with secondary site of action through hypothalamic perception of hypoestrogenic state, which then causes the pituitary in turn to increase the release of LH and FSH, which in turn will increase, fertility outcomes. So how that translates in men, you have this graphical representation, which is essentially more or less the same thing. You have this clomiphene, which is interacting with estrogen receptors to trick the hypothalamus into thinking there is your entire HPTA is regulated by a feedback loop based on receptor activation, agonism, antagonism, or agonism, in terms of how it's achieving either physiologic effects through adequate stimulation, a better, more, English way to put it. So Clomid, interacts with these estrogen receptors and prevents your body from achieving adequate estrogen receptor activation perceptively. So it has different actions in different areas of the body, but the hypothalamus interprets this hypoestrogenic state, which then increases gonadotropin releasing hormone to the pituitary, which the pituitary then spits out more luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone down to the testes, which then stimulates increased testosterone production and increased estradiol as a consequence to that. But again, if that estradiol can't actually do its actions on estrogen receptors and do what it's supposed to do, or it's being impeded from giving that feedback to the hypothalamus, then you will have this feedback loop interruption essentially, where your body can significantly increase testosterone, but basically tricking it into thinking it needs to produce more test to get more estrogen out, because testosterone is the thing that essentially dictates how much aromatization to estrogen you have in the body. So basically what you can expect from that are pretty significant outcomes from testosterone increase. So this is a breakdown of some of the most notable studies on Clomid. So we have here 2012 studies, 2005, 2003, 95, 91, and we see different dosing patterns, but ultimately it's more or less similar dosing parameters, with 25 to 50 milligrams being used in different kind of frequencies and whatnot. But ultimately, what do we see in general? We see changes in testosterone and nanograms per deciliter in around the mid 300s, so 333 average here. We have 293 here, 354, 362, a free testosterone increase of 8.8 to 11.9, 289 in this one, and this one, a fucking huge spike, 870 in youth, in young men, elderly, 489. So like, this is huge. Like, this is a fucking massive, massive, massive spike in testosterone. But again, this is a bit of an outlier one. This is more or less what you can expect in general. So again, obviously on paper, a lot of people are thinking, if I have a 500 total, which the reference range for testosterone is, 250 approximately to about, 900, 1,000, depending on what lab you use, getting a 333, 354, 362 total testosterone increase, quite goddamn significant, which may have some performance enhancing advantage for sure. But in addition to that, it will help offset suppression of different, suppressive things you're doing as a boxer, and potentially masked drug use to some extent through modulating different ratios that would otherwise be used and in a tightly regulated fashion to monitor your steroidal module to see if you are doping with testosterone or other things of this nature. So there's a reason why it's banned, and it makes sense why it's on the banned substance list. It can not only be used to modulate different steroidal ratios endogenously in the body, which then will fuck with your ability to interpret if this guy might be doping with testosterone or something else. But in addition to that, it has its own inherent, very, very positive, influential effects on testosterone production in men. So obviously, there are detriments to inhibiting estrogen's actions at the receptor, but that trade-off for certain individuals in certain contexts could make sense in a performance enhancing context, but also in a fertility enhancement or, masking context or whatever. So does it make sense for him to be using this? Again, keep in mind, he goes into this, what could be a, like 8-week testing window prior to the fight, which, obviously isn't enough to really rigorously assess like stringent doping ultimately at the end of the day. But for assessing Clomid, is it adequate enough? Probably. Because when you actually look at the detection time of Clomid, like, you have a certain amount of Clomid can be detected in your body. It's not like an endogenous hormone you produce, whereby there has to be some sort of differentiating metric by which you figure out like what's the natural Clomid and what's like the exogenous synthetic Clomid. Like, no, if Clomid's in your body at a threshold amount that is deemed to be, like any presence of it in any quantities whatsoever that are past this, actual threshold that they have determined for doping parameters. Because again, certain bodies will change because they want to avoid, they're becoming very cognizant of the, contamination of supplements issue too, where you have, if somebody has a trace amount of something that's so minute that could offer no performance enhancing advantage whatsoever because of, contamination of something, should they be penalized for that if they've been rigorously tested around the clock and they have some drug which can literally remain in your system for months on end, but the quantity at which it's present at the time of the test, given the frequency of random tests around that window, and they were clean, like, You know, was there even an opportunity for performance enhancement or fucking with the system? You know, there has to be some sort of leeway in some capacity, because again, like, so much shit is tainted nowadays with trace amounts of whatever. Like, even some of the NSF approval guideline metrics appear to be kind of finicky nowadays. And I'm not saying that's like, you know, with some of the like UFC approved brands necessarily or anything like that, but I know, like, I've heard some of the ways they can get around getting like safe for sport certified approval is actually like, you know, there's kind of like loopholes that are a bit fucky that can leave you with contaminated supplements still, even if you think your shit is clean, or, you know, like totally safe for sport. I'm not saying that's always the case at all, or that's even frequently the case, but it's just, you know, what I've seen in the supplement industry and some of the loopholes to achieve NSF status. So anyways, would he be using Clomid? You know, does it make sense for him to get this performance enhancing advantage? Like, obviously on paper, it makes total sense why you would be trying to recover from some sort of anabolic exposure or mask something or whatever. And obviously this testosterone increase on paper is significant enough that's like, okay, yeah, using this drug definitely can help you out. And there's no doubting that. Like, there's definitely no disputing the fact that Clomid should be a banned substance. However, when it comes to being subjected to random testing for like 8 weeks beforehand rigorously, plus the UKAD testing and whatnot, like, what are you left with from a educated guess standpoint as to if he's doing this or not? What I can say is the most useful thing would be to refer to the detection time of this stuff. Clomid significantly raises testosterone gonadotropin levels in healthy men, thus can be abused as a performance enhancing drug. Such abuse is detectable in urine for greater than 4 months following short-term use. So again, if this is something you're intentionally trying to get away with, it's a very detectable compound. It's not a endogenously produced thing. It's either there or it's fucking not, and it's not supposed to be there. So if it's there, you know, you're automatically red flagged. Whereas with testosterone, if it's red flagged, it's like, it's based on a significant amount of extrapolation, longitudinal trends, et cetera, and trying to infer that somebody might be doing something based on very, very like aberrant levels that seem unusual, but you're otherwise supposed to have a decent amount of testosterone in your body naturally produced by your balls. But for Clomid, it's just not supposed to be there. So is this a drug with a greater than 4 month detection time, something you would be fucking around with when you're being tested by UKAD and VADA? Like, it seems highly unlikely that somebody would intentionally be using this drug. If I was trying to mask my testosterone use or trying to mask my synthetic use of some sort of actual performance enhancing agent, would Clomid be the way I would go about it? No, definitely wouldn't. If I was going to be using a SERM in any capacity too, it would be something that is a designer drug that is actually going to be undetectable. However, is there a possibility that he was trying to get a designer drug and ended up with Clomid, or, you know, something that was spiked with Clomid or whatever it is? Sure, that's definitely a possible outcome. But based on I would have to see the actual quantity present, the testing results around that window, where they were to actually give a like a much more dialed in assessment. I would also love to see his longitudinal trends of his steroidal module, and all of his hematology, all of his, you know, everything from a result standpoint would be far more informative to give a more thorough response here. But just based on, you know, giving a quick answer based on what people want in my opinion on, I think it's highly unlikely somebody would be using this drug intentionally for performance enhancement. I think they would be like, it's almost beyond the level of stupid advisement to that point. Because it's like, years ago, I could understand when testing wasn't that stringent, people weren't subjecting themselves to, you know, multiple testing authorities, around the clock shit, didn't even understand how this stuff worked. And again, a lot of these fighters don't understand how this stuff worked, but there's more readily available information than ever and more scrutiny on what's going on the internet than ever. So for somebody to have justified themselves using one of the most detectable fertility agents in the fucking world, like, is this something you would, even if you were to try and do something like that, like it would be far more sensical, even if you were to use something that is on the banned substance list, to be using like an LH mimic or like a gonadotropin releasing hormone, like something that's an analog that is, you know, undetectable or even exists that you could hypothetically try and, you know, like shimmy your way out of through an explanation that it's like, you know, it's in and out of your system way faster or whatever. But with this, like, there is so little leeway for fucking around. It is so detectable, it's so not supposed to be there, that it would be one of the last choices you would intentionally use as a performance enhancing drug. So to me, there's like one of two options here probably that I would guesstimate. Is he either thought he was getting something else that was tainted with this, or he actually got trace amounts of this tainted in something he was taking that he otherwise thought was clean, or he was just being very not being careful enough and ended up getting something tainted in something that he took, or was spiked by somebody else who really knows for certain. But ultimately, you know, if I was an athlete, or now again, obviously, you know, my stance as an athlete would be totally different than most guys who don't, you know, fucking study this stuff or whatever, but if you're an athlete who is at the top of the sport, you would be getting advisement from somebody who's reasonably educated, presumably. And if they ever told you to take Clomid for performance enhancing drugs, as a performance enhancing drug, like that would be like, I feel like even like an idiot athlete would probably be like, isn't that the drug that, like, you know, so-and-so tested positive for? Isn't that like a pretty detectable one? Like, it takes a quick fucking Google search to be like, detection time of Clomid, and it's fucking greater than 4 months. Like, this is not hard information to find. Like, this would not be something you would be intentionally using, in my opinion, unless you were an idiot. like plain and simple. So to me, I don't think this is not what I would use for masking. This is not something I would use for performance enhancing drug use. I think this is probably either if you were, like I said, trying to get something as a designer drug, it was tainted with this, because again, you know, China could be relatively unreliable. Some of these chemists where they are, you know, oh, we're gonna synthesize you this thing and it's, you know, gonna be novel and this and that. It's gonna be undetectable, and they just end up sending you like fucking Clomid or N-clomiphene or whatever, or something that's like very highly detectable and well known, and you get fucked over. You know, that's definitely something that has happened in the past. However, with this drug in particular, like even if you did that, you would hope that guy would HPLC test whatever the fuck his designer drug was and hope that it's, you know, and see pretty quick that like, oh shit, it's actually Clomid, I should not take this. That would be prudent. So the likely scenario is probably, in my opinion, again, I would need all the test results to make a more informed conclusion, but either option A that I just outlined, where it was trying to get something else, accidentally got something with Clomid in it, or was literally Clomid, which we would be able to figure out pretty easily based on the amount that was in the system and the amounts around that testing window. Or option B, unintentional accidental exposure is my likely, you know, conclusion on that. So take from that what you will. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. All the comments help the algorithm, much appreciated. Like, subscribe, check out my blog, moreplacemordates.com. Follow my Instagram, @moreplacemordates, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts. If you want to support the channel, check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.